The sun hung like a merciless eye in the cloudless sky as Eleanor Foster wiped sweat from her brow and stared at the cracked earth that had once been fertile farmland. 3 months without rain had transformed her promising homestead into a barren wasteland, the soil so dry it crumbled between her fingers like ash. She had come west with dreams as vast as the Montana Territory itself, but in the summer of 1883, those dreams were withering faster than her corn crop. Eleanor straightened her back and adjusted her worn straw hat, refusing to let despair claim her completely. At 26, she had already weathered more storms than most: the loss of her parents to influenza, the journey west alone, and the backbreaking work of establishing a farm with nothing but determination and the small inheritance her father had left. She would not surrender to drought, not when she had come so far. The distant sound of hoofbeats drew her attention toward the narrow dirt road that connected her isolated property to the nearest town of Willow Creek, 15 miles away. Visitors were rare, especially in these harsh conditions, and Eleanor felt a flicker of curiosity as she shaded her eyes against the glare. A lone rider approached, his broad-shouldered silhouette growing clearer as he neared. The man sat tall in the saddle, guiding his chestnut horse with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. A worn leather hat shaded his face, and dust coated his denim pants and faded blue shirt. Eleanor felt a prickle of wariness. Living alone on the frontier had taught her caution, especially when it came to strange men. Her fingers closed around the handle of the small knife she kept in her apron pocket, a gift from her father, and a reminder that survival sometimes required more than just hard work. "Afternoon, madam," the rider called, his voice carrying across the parched field as he slowed his mount. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Benjamin Newcomb. People call me Ben. I'm looking for the Foster homestead." Eleanor studied him carefully before responding. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "You found it," she replied, keeping her distance. "I'm Eleanor Foster. What brings you to my farm, Mr. Newcomb?" Ben dismounted with fluid grace, keeping hold of his horse's reins. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps early 30s with streaks of silver at his temples. "I've been hired by the territorial government to survey water options for struggling farms in the region." He gestured toward the leather saddlebags draped over his horse. "I'm a water finder of sorts. Some call it dowsing, others call it geological surveying. I call it my job." Eleanor felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. She'd heard tales of water witches who claimed to find hidden springs, usually for exorbitant fees that desperate farmers couldn't afford. "I don't have money to pay for such services," she said bluntly, "and I've already dug 3 dry wells." Ben's expression softened. "I'm not asking for payment, Miss Foster. My salary comes from the territorial office. Governor Crosby is concerned about farms failing during this drought. Homesteaders are abandoning their claims and heading back east. That doesn't serve anyone's interests." Eleanor hesitated, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "And you believe you can find water where there is none?" "I don't believe in miracles," Ben replied, his voice steady. "But I do believe in science, geology, and years of experience. Sometimes water isn't where we expect it to be." He glanced toward the distant foothills. "I've been mapping underground water routes through this territory for 2 years now." Something in his straightforward manner eased Eleanor's wariness. "I suppose I have nothing to lose by letting you try," she conceded. "But I should warn you that others have attempted and failed." "May I?" Ben gestured toward her field, and Eleanor nodded. She watched as he led his horse toward the property, his gait relaxed yet purposeful. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than despair, a dangerous sensation she dared not name as hope. "How long have you been working this land?" Ben asked, bending down to examine the soil. "Nearly 3 years," Eleanor replied. "The first 2 seasons were promising. We had decent rainfall, and I managed to bring in enough crops to sustain myself and have some left to sell." She gestured toward the withered stalks of corn. "This year has been different," Ben nodded, his expression solemn as he surveyed the failed crops. This drought has broken many a strong farmer. You've held on longer than most. I have nowhere else to go, Eleanor admitted. This land is everything I have. Ben looked at her with unexpected understanding. Then we'd better make sure it survives. For the next hour, Eleanor watched as Ben walked her property, examining the contours of the land, the types of native plants that still clung to life, and the rock formations that dotted the eastern edge of her farm. He worked methodically, making notes in a small leather-bound journal. Occasionally, he would stop, close his eyes, and stand completely still, as if listening to something only he could hear. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ben approached Eleanor, who had been tending to her small vegetable garden, the only plants still surviving thanks to her careful rationing of the precious water from her nearly depleted cistern. "I have good news," he said, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow. "There's water under your land, Miss Foster, a lot of it actually." Eleanor straightened, hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "How can you be certain?" "The geological formations to the east suggest an underground stream flowing beneath your property. Your previous wells were dug in the wrong locations. If we position a new well about a quarter-mile from your house, near that stand of cottonwoods, I believe we'll hit water at about 60 feet. Eleanor's heart sank. 60 feet, that's impossible for me to dig alone, and I can't afford to hire help. Ben replaced his hat, a small smile playing at his lips. "Well, it's fortunate I'm not just a water finder then. I've dug my share of wells too." He glanced toward the setting sun. "If you're amenable, I could camp here tonight and begin work in the morning. The government has authorized me to provide practical assistance where needed." Eleanor hesitated. The prospect of water life giving water was tempting beyond measure. But allowing a stranger to stay on her property went against every cautious instinct she'd developed. "You've no need to fear me, Miss Foster," Ben said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "I'll camp by the cottonwoods, away from your house. You'll hardly know I'm here except when I'm working." "I'm not afraid," Eleanor replied, lifting her chin slightly. It wasn't entirely true, but her need for water outweighed her caution. "And I won't have you sleeping outside when I have a perfectly good barn. You can set up there." Ben nodded, his expression revealing nothing but polite gratitude. "Thank you for your hospitality. I promise I won't be an inconvenience." As Eleanor led him toward the modest barn, she felt a curious mixture of emotions: hope, wariness, and something else she couldn't quite name. This stranger, with his confident hands and quiet demeanor, represented something she hadn't permitted herself in months: possibility. "Will you join me for supper?" she found herself asking as Ben unsaddled his horse. "It's nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread, but it's hot." Ben looked surprised, then pleased. "I'd be honored, Miss Foster. Thank you." That evening, seated across from Ben at her small kitchen table, Eleanor found herself strangely at ease. He spoke of his travels across the territory, of underground water patterns and the geological history of the land. His voice was low and measured, his stories fascinating without any hint of boastfulness. "How did you come to this work?" Eleanor asked as she poured him a second cup of coffee. "Finding water seems an unusual profession." Ben's expression grew thoughtful. "My father was a Pennsylvania coal miner." He had an instinct for what lay beneath the earth. "I inherited that sense but preferred the open sky to tunnels." He smiled slightly. "After the war, I served with the Union. I came west looking for something. Wasn't sure what until I discovered I could help people find water." "There's something profound about bringing life to parched land." "The war," Eleanor echoed. "You must have been very young." 17 when I enlisted in 64, Ben confirmed. "Old enough to fight, too young to understand what I was fighting for." "Afterward, I couldn't settle back into normal life in Pennsylvania. The West seemed to offer space, room to breathe." Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly. "That's why I came too. After my parents died, our family home in Illinois felt like it was suffocating me with memories." She glanced around her modest kitchen. "I wanted to build something that was entirely my own." "And you have," Ben said, his gray eyes warm with admiration. "What you've accomplished alone is remarkable, Miss Foster." "Eleanor," she corrected impulsively. "If you're going to save my farm, you might as well use my given name." "Eleanor," he repeated, and the sound of her name in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. Then you must call me Ben. Later, as she prepared for bed in the solitude of her small bedroom, Eleanor found herself strangely attuned to the presence of the man sleeping in her barn. It had been so long since another human being had stayed on her property. The isolation of frontier life was something she had grown accustomed to, even embraced. Yet there was comfort in knowing someone else was near, especially someone who brought the promise of water. The following morning, Eleanor rose before dawn, as was her habit. She was surprised to find Ben already up, building a small fire outside and heating a pot of coffee. He'd unsaddled his horse, a sturdy gelding named Scout, and was examining the tools he'd brought for well digging. "You're an early riser," she commented, approaching with a basket containing bread and preserves for breakfast. Ben glanced up with a smile that transformed his weathered face. "Farm habits die hard. My ma would have tanned my hide if I was still abed after sunrise." They shared a simple breakfast as the eastern sky blushed pink, then golden. Ben outlined his plan for the well, explaining each step of the process with patience and clarity. His knowledge was impressive, and Eleanor found herself asking questions, eager to understand the science behind his work. "The most important thing," Ben explained, sketching a rough diagram in the dirt, "is finding the exact right spot. Too far in any direction, and we might miss the underground stream entirely." Eleanor watched his strong, capable hands as they moved over the earth, noting the calluses that spoke of years of physical labor. There was something reassuring about those hands. They knew what they were doing. As the day progressed, Eleanor divided her attention between her usual farm chores and observing Ben's work. He had marked the well site and begun the arduous process of digging, removing earth with methodical precision. The summer heat was relentless, and by midday, Ben had stripped down to his undershirt, which clung to his broad shoulders with sweat. Eleanor found herself watching him more than was strictly necessary, admiring the efficient way he moved, the careful attention he paid to his task. When she brought him water at noon, their fingers brushed briefly as he took the ladle, and the unexpected contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "Thank you," he said, his voice slightly hoarse from exertion and dust. "This is thirsty work." "How long do you think it will take?" Eleanor asked, forcing her eyes away from the strong column of his throat as he drank. Ben wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "With good progress, maybe a week. The first 20 feet are the hardest. After that, I can set up a windlass system to bring up the dirt more efficiently." Eleanor nodded, mentally calculating how long she could extend her hospitality. Food was scarce, but she had enough to feed them both for a week if she was careful. And if Ben succeeded, if he actually found water, the sacrifice would be more than worthwhile. "I'll help," she decided. "I'm stronger than I look, and 2 people working will make the job go faster." Ben studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "It's backbreaking work." "So is farming," Eleanor countered, "and I've been doing that alone for 3 years. A slow smile spread across Ben's face. "I don't doubt your strength for a moment, Eleanor. I just didn't want to presume upon your hospitality further by asking for your labor as well." "You're not asking. I'm offering. This is my farm, my well, my future. I should have a hand in creating it." Ben's smile deepened, reaching his storm-gray eyes. "Well then, partner, let's dig ourselves a well." For the next 3 days, Eleanor and Ben fell into an easy rhythm of work. They rose at dawn, shared a simple breakfast, and worked on the well until the midday heat became too intense. After a rest during the hottest part of the day, they would resume work until dusk, when Eleanor would prepare a modest supper from her dwindling supplies. Their evenings were spent on her small porch, where Ben would tell stories of his travels across the territory or listen attentively as Eleanor shared her dreams for the farm. Despite the exhausting physical labor and the uncertainty that still hung over her land, Eleanor found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations. Ben was unlike any man she had ever met, thoughtful, respectful, and genuinely interested in her opinions. By the 4th day, they had dug down nearly 30 feet. The well shaft was now deep enough that they had constructed a simple windlass system, with one of them working below while the other operated the rope and bucket to haul up dirt. "We're making good progress," Ben called up from the bottom of the shaft, his voice echoing slightly against the earthen walls. "The soil is changing, getting more moist. That's a good sign." Eleanor leaned over the edge, careful not to dislodge any dirt. "How much deeper do you think?" "Hard to say exactly, maybe another 20 feet. Ben wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead. "We should switch places. You've been working the windlass all morning." Eleanor hesitated. She had helped with the digging when the shaft was shallower, but now that it had reached this depth, she felt a flicker of apprehension. "Are you sure it's safe?" Ben's expression softened. "I wouldn't suggest it if it wasn't. The walls are holding firm." "But if you'd prefer to stay topside, that's fine too." Eleanor squared her shoulders. "No, I want to help with the actual digging. It seems only right." Ben nodded, respect evident in his eyes. He guided her through the process of descending into the shaft, using the rope ladder they had constructed. When she reached the bottom, the temperature was noticeably cooler, the earth walls rising around her like a sanctuary from the relentless sun above. "Use the pick to loosen the soil, then fill the bucket," Ben instructed from above, "and sing out if you need anything." For the next hour, Eleanor worked steadily, the physical labor a welcome distraction from the awareness that Ben was watching over her. There was something intimate about this arrangement, her below ground, him above, their lives literally connected by a rope. As she drove the pick into the earth for what must have been the 100th time, Eleanor felt the tool sink deeper than expected. A small trickle of water began to seep from the spot where she had struck. "Ben," she called, excitement making her voice tremble. "Ben, I think I found something." Within moments, Ben had lowered himself down the ladder. He knelt beside her, examining the damp spot with an expert eye. Gently, he placed his hand against the earth, feeling the moisture. "Well done, Eleanor," he said, his voice low with contained excitement. "That's seepage from the water table. We're getting close." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes, overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and hope. "You were right, there is water." "I promised you there was," Ben replied, and when she looked up, she found his face much closer than she had realized. In the dim light of the well shaft, his eyes were dark and intent on hers. For a breathless moment, neither of them moved. Then Ben reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "You have dirt on your face," he murmured, but his hand lingered a moment longer than necessary. Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest. She was acutely aware of how alone they were, hidden from the world in this space they had created together beneath the earth. If Ben were to kiss her now, would she stop him? The realization that she wouldn't send a shock of both alarm and anticipation through her. Instead, Ben cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. "We should reinforce this section before we dig deeper. The pressure from the water table will make the walls less stable." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his practicality even as she felt a confusing pang of disappointment. "What do we need to do?" For the remainder of the day, they worked to stabilize the well shaft, using wooden supports Ben had prepared for this purpose. The work was exacting and required their complete attention, leaving little room for Eleanor to dwell on the moment they had shared. By sunset, they had reinforced the shaft and were ready to continue digging the following day. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the first stars appear, Eleanor found herself studying Ben's profile in the fading light. In just a few days, this stranger had brought more than the promise of water to her failing farm. He had brought companionship, knowledge, and a sense of possibility she had almost forgotten. "Tell me about your family," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "You mentioned your father and mother, but do you have siblings?" Ben's expression softened with affection. "Two sisters, both married with children of their own back in Pennsylvania. Mary's the eldest, practical as the day is long and twice as stubborn. Emma's the youngest, always had her head in books and dreams." He smiled. "They write regularly, trying to convince me to return east and settle down properly, as they put it." "Why haven't you?" Eleanor asked. "Settled down, I mean." Ben was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. I suppose I never found a reason compelling enough to stop moving. After the war, it seemed like staying in one place meant facing things I wasn't ready to face. His voice grew softer. And later, when those ghosts quieted some, I discovered I had a skill that could help people. It's difficult to put down roots when your gift lies in helping others find theirs. Eleanor nodded, understanding. I can see how that would be a calling of sorts. What about you? Ben asked, turning those perceptive gray eyes on her. No family trying to coax you back east. Eleanor shook her head. My parents were my only family. My mother came from England as a girl, and my father's people were from Boston originally. They moved to Illinois before I was born. She gazed out at the darkening land that had become her home. When they died, there was nothing tying me there anymore. I saw an advertisement for homesteading in the Montana Territory, and something about it called to me. That took courage, Ben said. Coming all this way alone. Eleanor gave a small laugh, or foolishness, sometimes I'm not sure which. Not foolishness, Ben said firmly. I've met many homesteaders in my travels. Few have the determination you've shown. Most would have abandoned this place at the first sign of drought. His praise warmed her in a way the cooling evening air couldn't touch. Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just being stubborn, holding on to something that isn't meant to be. The water beneath your land suggests otherwise, Ben replied. This place was meant for someone who wouldn't give up on it, someone who could see its potential even when others couldn't. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as night fully descended, but Eleanor found herself newly aware of Ben in ways that both excited and unsettled her. His voice, his laugh, the way his hands moved as he spoke, all of these details seemed suddenly, intensely important. When they finally bid each other good night, Eleanor lay awake long after retiring to her bedroom, listening to the familiar night sounds of her farm and thinking about the man sleeping in her barn. In just a few days, he had transformed from stranger to what? Not quite a friend, but something equally significant. Partner, perhaps, someone who understood what this land meant to her because he understood the land itself. The next morning brought a new challenge. As they prepared to continue digging, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the rain that had evaded them all summer. While desperately needed, a heavy rainfall now could be disastrous for their partially completed well. We need to protect the shaft, Ben said, eyeing the approaching storm with concern. If it fills with water and mud, we could lose days of work. Working quickly, they constructed a temporary shelter over the well opening, using canvas and lumber from Eleanor's modest supply. As they secured the last corner, the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly escalating into a downpour that transformed the parched landscape. Eleanor laughed with delight, turning her face up to the rain. After months of drought, the cool water against her skin felt like a blessing, a promise fulfilled. Without thinking, she spread her arms wide, embracing the downpour. Ben watched her, transfixed by the joy radiating from her rain-soaked figure. Her dress clung to her slender frame, her hair darkened and heavy with moisture. She looked wild and free and utterly beautiful. "Eleanor," he called over the drumming rain, "we should get inside." She turned to him, still smiling, water streaming down her face. "Isn't it wonderful? My crops, some might still be saved if this rain continues." Ben couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "It is wonderful, but you'll catch your death standing out here." Eleanor reluctantly acknowledged the wisdom of his suggestion, and they raced toward the house, arriving on her porch breathless and drenched. Water dripped from their clothes onto the wooden boards as thunder rolled across the sky. "Well," Eleanor said, pushing wet hair from her face, "I believe this calls for celebration. I have a bottle of blackberry wine I've been saving for a special occasion." "Rain after drought certainly qualifies," Ben agreed, removing his sodden hat. Inside, Eleanor lit a lamp against the storm-darkened day and retrieved the wine from its hiding place in a kitchen cupboard. As she poured 2 glasses, Ben stood awkwardly in the center of her small sitting room, conscious of the water pooling around his boots. "I should probably change," Eleanor said, suddenly aware of how her wet clothing must appear. "And you," she paused, realizing the dilemma, "your bag is in the barn." "I'll be fine," Ben assured her. "The rain will pass soon enough." Eleanor shook her head. "Nonsense." I have some of my father's old clothes. They might be a bit small, but they're dry. Before he could protest, she disappeared into her bedroom, returning moments later with a simple shirt and trousers. You can change in there, I'll use the bedroom. Ben accepted the clothes with a grateful nod. When Eleanor emerged from her bedroom a few minutes later, dressed in a simple blue dress with her damp hair twisted into a loose braid, she found Ben standing by the window, watching the rain. Her father's clothes fit him surprisingly well, though the shirt pulled slightly across his broader shoulders. "The rain's good," he said without turning. "The land was so dry it will soak up every drop." Eleanor joined him at the window, aware of his proximity in the small room. "Will it affect the well?" she asked. "It might slow us down a day or two, but it won't cause any permanent problems. Our covering should keep the shaft from filling." He turned to her then, his expression thoughtful. "This is just the beginning, Eleanor. Once we hit the main water vein, you'll never have to worry about drought again. You could expand your crops, maybe even keep more livestock." The future he described, her future, suddenly seemed not just possible but within reach. Impulsively, Eleanor reached for his hand, squeezing it in gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything you're doing. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Ben's fingers tightened around hers. "Seeing this land thrive will be payment enough." His voice had dropped to a lower register, and Eleanor became acutely aware of how close they were standing, her hand still held in his. The rain drummed against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. In this moment, the outside world, with all its hardships and uncertainties, seemed very far away. There was only this room, this man, and the connection growing between them. Ben released her hand gently. "We should drink that wine before the rain stops and we have to get back to work," he said, his tone lighter. Eleanor nodded, grateful for the moment to compose herself. She retrieved the glasses and handed one to Ben, then raised her own in a toast. "To rain and water beneath the earth. And to stubborn farmers who refuse to give up," Ben added with a warm smile that reached his eyes. They spent the afternoon in easy conversation as the storm continued outside. Eleanor learned more about Ben's work with the territorial government, his theories about underground water systems, and his dreams of someday mapping the entire Western water table. In turn, she shared stories of her early struggles establishing the farm, the mistakes she'd made, and the triumphs she'd celebrated alone. "The first harvest was the sweetest," she told him. "Just knowing I had done it, that I could provide for myself with my own two hands, I'd never felt so complete." Ben nodded, understanding perfectly. "That's the feeling I get when water first gushes from a well I've dug, like I've connected to something ancient and essential." He smiled at her over his wine glass. "Most people don't understand that satisfaction." "No," Eleanor agreed softly. "They don't." As evening approached, the rain finally began to slacken, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. Ben reluctantly suggested he should return to the barn to check on his horse and their well-digging equipment. "Will you come back for supper?" Eleanor asked, surprising herself with how much she wanted him to say yes. Ben's expression warmed. "I'd like that very much." Left alone, Eleanor busied herself preparing a meal from her modest stores. The rain had brought not just moisture to her land, but a strange sense of abundance to her spirit. She found herself humming as she worked, an old folk tune her mother used to sing. When Ben returned, his hair still damp from the rain, Eleanor felt a flutter in her chest that she couldn't dismiss as mere gratitude or friendship. There was something about his presence that made her small house feel more like a home than it had in all the years she'd lived there alone. They ate by lamplight, the soft glow casting warm shadows across the table. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that required no filling. When Ben complimented her cooking, Eleanor felt herself blush like a girl much younger than her 26 years. After the meal, they moved to the small sitting area where Ben helped Eleanor mend some farm equipment that had been awaiting her attention. Their hands occasionally brushed as they worked, each contact sending a current of awareness through Eleanor that both thrilled and frightened her. "Tell me about your plans for the farm," Ben said as he expertly repaired a broken harness strap. "Once you have water, what crops will you focus on?" Eleanor's eyes brightened with enthusiasm. I want to expand beyond just corn and wheat. There's good money in vegetables for the mining camps and maybe fruit trees eventually, and I've always wanted a proper kitchen garden with herbs and flowers. She paused, suddenly self-conscious. That probably sounds foolish when I'm fighting just to survive. Not foolish at all, Ben replied seriously. The best farmers I know can see beyond mere survival to what the land could truly become. He set down the mended harness. Your vision is what will make this place thrive long after the well is dug. His faith in her and her farm and her future touched Eleanor deeply. I hope you're right. I usually am, Ben said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. About water, at least. When it came time for Ben to return to the barn for the night, Eleanor found herself reluctant to see him go. Standing in the doorway, she watched as he prepared to step back into the misty rain. Ben, she said impulsively, thank you for today. Not just the work on the well, but everything else. He turned to her, his expression softening. I should be thanking you, Eleanor. It's been a long time since I've enjoyed someone's company as much as I've enjoyed yours. For a breathless moment, Eleanor thought he might step closer, might even kiss her. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that somehow managed to be both respectful and tender. Good night, Eleanor. Sleep well. As she closed the door behind him, Eleanor leaned against it, her heart racing with emotions she had not allowed herself to feel in years. This man, this kind, capable stranger who had appeared on her doorstep just days ago, was becoming important to her in ways that went far beyond his ability to find water. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that lingered long after she had extinguished the lamp and retired to bed. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning, a gentle, steady downpour that soaked deep into the parched earth. By midday, small pools had formed in the low areas of Eleanor's fields, and the withered crops showed faint signs of revival. The drought had not broken. It would take far more than one rainstorm for that, but it was a reprieve, a breath of possibility. Unable to continue work on the well until the ground dried somewhat, Ben turned his attention to other repairs around the farm. Eleanor found him in her small barn, mending the roof where it had begun to leak. You don't have to do that, she protested, watching as he skillfully replaced damaged shingles. The well is your priority. Ben glanced down at her from his perch in the rafters. Can't dig in this mud, might as well make myself useful elsewhere. He hammered another nail into place. Besides, what good is a well if your barn roof leaks and ruins your hay storage? Eleanor couldn't argue with his logic, though she felt a twinge of guilt at how much work he was doing beyond his official duties. At least let me help. Together, they spent the day addressing the many small repairs that Eleanor had been forced to postpone during the drought. With limited funds and no help, she had prioritized only the most critical maintenance. Now, with Ben's skilled hands and practical knowledge, they tackled broken fences, loose boards on the house, and a malfunctioning pump on her existing cistern. Working alongside him, Eleanor was struck again by Ben's quiet competence. He approached each task methodically, explaining what he was doing so that she could maintain the repairs after he was gone. The thought of his eventual departure created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. You're good at this, she commented as they took a break for a late lunch. Fixing things, Ben shrugged modestly. Growing up poor teaches you to repair rather than replace, and traveling through homesteads I've seen every kind of farm problem imaginable. Is that all you do, find water and move on? The question slipped out before Eleanor could consider its implications. Ben studied her for a moment before answering. It has been, yes. There's always another farm in trouble, another town running dry. He paused, his expression thoughtful. But lately, I've been wondering if there might be more to life than constant movement. Their eyes met across the simple lunch of bread and cheese, and Eleanor felt a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. In that moment, she understood that Ben was as solitary as she was, as accustomed to self-reliance, and perhaps as hungry for something more. The rain finally stopped that evening, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The setting sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the moistened fields. After supper, Eleanor and Ben walked the perimeter of her property, assessing the impact of the rainfall. "Look," Eleanor said, pointing to a patch of corn that had appeared hopeless just days before. Tiny green shoots had emerged from stalks she had assumed dead. "They're fighting back." Ben smiled at her evident delight. "Like their owner," he commented, "resilient against the odds." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I'm just stubborn, according to most people in town." "Stubbornness is underrated," Ben replied. "Especially out here, the West doesn't reward the faint of heart." They paused at the edge of Eleanor's property, where the land sloped gently toward a stretch of open prairie. The sunset painted the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold, a vista so beautiful it caught at Eleanor's throat. "I never tire of this view," she said softly. "Even during the worst of the drought, when I was most discouraged, the sunset would remind me why I came here." Ben nodded, understanding. "That's the West for you, brutal one moment, breathtaking the next." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "It's not an easy life you've chosen, Eleanor." "No," she agreed, "but it's mine, and that makes all the difference." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the sun sank below the horizon, neither feeling the need to fill the quiet with words. In that shared moment, Eleanor realized how rare it was to find someone who understood the language of the land, as she did, who saw both its harshness and its beauty without flinching from either. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the air freshened by the rain. The ground had dried enough to resume work on the well, and Ben and Eleanor set to their task with renewed energy. The seepage they had discovered before the rain had increased, a promising sign that they were approaching the main water source. By midday, they had dug another 5 feet, and the earthen walls of the shaft were noticeably damper. Ben, working below while Eleanor operated the windlass, called up excitedly, "The soil structure is changing. We're getting close to the aquifer." Eleanor peered down into the shaft, her heart racing with anticipation. "How much deeper?" "Maybe another day's work," Ben replied, "possibly less if we're lucky." Their progress was steady throughout the afternoon, with Ben and Eleanor trading places at regular intervals to share the more strenuous work of digging. As the sun began to lower in the western sky, Ben, who was working at the bottom of the shaft, suddenly shouted, "Eleanor, it's coming through." Eleanor leaned over the edge to see water seeping rapidly from the walls of the shaft, pooling around Ben's boots. His face was alight with triumph as he drove his shovel into the soft earth one more time, and water gushed forth, quickly filling the bottom of the well. "We did it." Ben called up, laughing as the cool water soaked his pants. "Get the bucket down here. We need to start reinforcing these walls immediately before they collapse." The next hours were a blur of activity as they worked to stabilize the well shaft against the pressure of the flowing water. Ben directed the operation with calm efficiency, showing Eleanor how to position the wooden supports they had prepared. By sunset, they had secured the well enough to leave it overnight, with the water level rising steadily. Exhausted but elated, they stood side by side at the well's edge, gazing down at the dark water that now filled the bottom quarter of the shaft. "It's really there," Eleanor whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "All this time right beneath my feet." Ben placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your land was never failing, Eleanor. It just needed help accessing what was already there." His voice was soft with an emotion that matched her own. "By this time tomorrow, you'll have a fully functioning well. After that, we can talk about irrigation systems for your fields." Eleanor turned to him, overwhelmed by gratitude and something deeper, something that had been growing between them with each passing day. "I don't know how to thank you." Ben's hand moved from her shoulder to gently brush a strand of hair from her face, reminiscent of their moment in the well shaft days earlier. This time, however, he didn't pull away. "Seeing your farm thrive will be thanks enough," he said, his voice low. "Seeing you happy here, building the life you dreamed of, that's worth more than any payment." Eleanor was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his hand against her cheek. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. "Ben," she whispered, his name a question and an invitation. He hesitated, his expression a mixture of desire and uncertainty. "Eleanor, I should tell you, I'm not staying. Once your well is complete, I have other farms to visit, other water sources to find. The reminder of his impending departure stung, but Eleanor had known from the beginning that his presence was temporary. I understand, she said softly. You have your duties. Ben's eyes searched hers. But I find myself wishing for the first time in years that my duties might lead me back to one particular place. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. To one particular person. Eleanor's heart leapt at his admission. I would like that, she replied simply. Ben's expression softened, and slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. Eleanor responded with a warmth that surprised her hands moving to rest against his chest as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ben rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day I found water in your well shaft, he confessed. Eleanor smiled. I've wanted you to since then, too. They walked back to the house hand in hand, the simple contact as meaningful as the kiss they had shared. The evening ahead seemed full of new possibilities, the future suddenly brighter than Eleanor had dared to hope. As they prepared supper together in her small kitchen, Eleanor was struck by how natural it felt to share this space with Ben. His movements complemented hers, their conversation flowing easily as they worked. It was a glimpse of what life could be, not alone against the elements, but together, sharing both burdens and joys. After they had eaten, they sat together on the porch, watching as stars appeared in the clear night sky. Ben's arm rested comfortably around Eleanor's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. Tell me more about the irrigation system you mentioned, she said, her mind already planning for the farm's future. Ben smiled at her practicality. We can use the natural contour of your land to create channels from the well to your fields. With a simple windmill pump, you could move water even during dry periods. His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder as he spoke. Your soil is good with reliable water. You could grow almost anything. And you, Eleanor asked quietly, where will you go after this? Ben was silent for a moment. There are 3 more farms on my current assignment list, all within 100 miles of here. After that, he looked down at her, his expression serious. After that, I'm not certain. For the first time, I'm questioning my nomadic existence. Eleanor's heart quickened at his implication, but she tempered her hope with caution. I wouldn't want you to abandon your calling because of what's happening between us. Your work is important. So is this, Ben replied, his voice low but certain. Eleanor, I've spent years helping others build their futures while avoiding putting down roots of my own, but being here with you, it's made me realize what I've been missing. Eleanor turned to face him fully. What are you saying, Ben? I'm saying I need to complete my current assignments. I made promises and I won't break them. His hand came up to cup her cheek. But then, if you're willing, I'd like to come back, not as a government water finder, but as a man who's found something far more precious than water. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I would like that very much, she whispered. This land has always felt like it was meant to be mine. Now I'm beginning to think perhaps it was waiting for both of us. Ben's kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, the night had grown fully dark around them, the stars brilliant in the clear sky. I should go to the barn, Ben said reluctantly. Tomorrow will be a full day of work finishing the well. Eleanor nodded, though everything in her wished he could stay. Tomorrow, she agreed, and then what comes after? The final day of well construction passed in a blur of focused labor and shared anticipation. By late afternoon, they had completed the stone lining of the shaft, installed a simple hand pump, and drawn the first bucket of clear, cold water from the depths of Eleanor's land. Standing together beside the finished well, their clothes dusty and their faces streaked with dirt and sweat, Eleanor and Ben watched as water flowed from the pump into a wooden trough. It's beautiful, Eleanor said, her voice filled with wonder as she cupped her hands beneath the stream and raised the water to her lips. It tasted sweet and clean, like a promise fulfilled. Ben watched her, his expression soft with affection. So are you, he said quietly. That evening, they celebrated their achievement with a small feast prepared from Eleanor's carefully hoarded supplies. supplemented by fresh vegetables from her garden that had begun to revive after the rain. They sat at her kitchen table, the simple meal illuminated by candles, their conversation flowing as easily as the water from the new well. "I've been thinking," Ben said as they finished the last of Eleanor's blackberry wine, "about the irrigation system we discussed. I could start the work before I lay out the main channels at least. That would give you a head start." Eleanor nodded, appreciating his practical concern for her farm even as her heart ached at the reminder of his imminent departure. "How soon must you go?" "I should leave for Maplewood Creek the day after tomorrow," Ben replied, his expression regretful. "Jeremiah Carson's farm is suffering badly from the drought. Then there's the Miller place near Fort Benton and the Whitcomb homestead further north. How long will those assignments take?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Ben considered. 3 weeks, possibly a month depending on conditions. He reached across the table to take her hand. "It will feel like an eternity." Eleanor squeezed his fingers. "The farm will be here when you return, and so will I." Later, as they stood in the doorway saying goodnight, Ben's kisses grew more urgent, his hands tangling in her hair as he drew her closer. Eleanor responded with equal fervor, her body pressed against his, her heart racing with desire and a deeper emotion she was only beginning to acknowledge. "Eleanor," Ben murmured against her lips, his voice rough with restraint, "I should go to the barn." She drew back slightly, studying his face in the lamplight. His eyes were dark with wanting her, his breathing as unsteady as her own. In that moment, Eleanor made a decision that had been forming in her heart since the day this man had appeared on her property, bringing hope and possibilities she had thought lost. "Stay," she whispered, taking his hand. "Stay with me tonight." Ben searched her face, his expression serious. "Are you certain? I don't want to take advantage." Eleanor silenced him with a gentle finger against his lips. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." She led him to her bedroom, the small space transformed by the emotions flowing between them. Their coming together was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the connection that had grown between them over the past days. In Ben's arms, Eleanor found a sense of homecoming she had never expected, as if the loneliness she had carried for so long was finally, completely dispelled. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Eleanor listened to the steady beat of Ben's heart beneath her ear. "I never expected this," she said softly. "When you rode onto my farm, I thought perhaps you might save my land. I never imagined you would change my life." Ben's arms tightened around her. "I never imagined finding a reason to stop wandering." His voice was thoughtful in the darkness. "I've seen so much of this territory, helped so many people create homes, but never thought to build one for myself." "And now?" Eleanor asked, raising herself on one elbow to look down at him. Ben's hand came up to trace the curve of her cheek. "Now I'm thinking about what it would mean to put down roots, to wake up every morning with you beside me, to see this land transform with the seasons year after year." The future he described filled Eleanor with a warmth that went beyond physical desire. "I would like that very much," she whispered. "I've built this farm alone, but I've always known it could be so much more with the right partner." "Partner," Ben repeated, smiling up at her. "I like the sound of that." The next day, Ben began laying out irrigation channels from the new well to Eleanor's fields, teaching her the principles of water flow and distribution so she could continue the work in his absence. They moved together in an easy rhythm, their shared labor punctuated by touches and glances that spoke of the night they had shared and the nights they hoped would follow. As the sun began to set on their final full day together, Ben stood with Eleanor at the edge of her property, his arm around her waist as they surveyed what they had accomplished. "It's a good start," he said, indicating the shallow trenches that would eventually carry life-giving water to the furthest reaches of her farm. "By the time I return, we can implement a more permanent system." "When you return," Eleanor corrected gently, leaning into his embrace. "Not if." Ben looked down at her, his expression serious. "When," he agreed. "I give you my word, Eleanor Foster. 1 month from today, I'll ride back onto this farm, and I'll be waiting," she promised, "tending what we've begun together." Their final evening together was bittersweet, filled with plans for the future and the knowledge of the separation to come. They spoke of improvements to the farm, of crops that could be planted once irrigation was complete, of a life shared rather than lived alone. And when they retired to Eleanor's bedroom, their lovemaking held both the passion of new discovery and the poignancy of impending farewell. In the gray light of dawn, Eleanor stood at the edge of her property, watching as Ben prepared scout for the journey ahead. He had packed his surveying equipment and the few personal possessions he carried, leaving behind only tools Eleanor would need for the irrigation work. "I left detailed notes on the kitchen table," Ben said as he tightened Scout's saddle, "about the irrigation channels and how to maintain the well. And a map to the Carson farm in case you need to send word." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight with emotions she was trying to contain. "I'll be fine, we both will." Ben turned to her then, taking her hands in his. "I know you will. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Eleanor Foster." He smiled, though his eyes were serious. "But being strong doesn't mean you have to be alone, not anymore." "1 month," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll keep busy, there's so much to do now that we have water." 1 month, Ben agreed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that gleamed in the early morning light. "I want you to have this. It belonged to my mother." He placed a simple silver ring in her palm, its surface worn smooth by years of wear. A small blue stone caught the light, twinkling like water in sunlight. "Ben," Eleanor breathed, closing her fingers around the precious gift. "I can't possibly, it's not a proposal," he assured her quickly. "Not yet. That will come when I return if you'll have me. This is a promise that what we've begun here won't end with my departure." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. "I'll keep it safe until you come back," she whispered, "and then we'll talk about forever." Ben gathered her in his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not: longing, promise, and a love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. When they finally parted, Eleanor stepped back, her head held high despite the tears on her cheeks. "Go safely," she said. "And come back to me." Ben mounted Scout, his eyes never leaving hers. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." With a final touch to the brim of his hat, a gesture that now held so much meaning, he turned his horse toward the road and rode away from Eleanor's farm. Eleanor watched until he was a distant silhouette against the rising sun, then turned back toward her land, their land, as she had begun to think of it. The new well stood as a testament to what they had accomplished together, water glistening in the morning light. The irrigation trenches they had begun stretched toward fields that would soon flourish again. There was work to be done, plans to implement, a future to prepare for. Eleanor squared her shoulders and walked toward the well, where she drew a bucket of clear, cold water. As she carried it toward the first row of corn plants, she felt the weight of Ben's ring on her finger, a promise as tangible as the water she now had in abundance. 1 month. She could wait that long for the man who had brought not just water to her failing farm, but life to her solitary existence. The man whose strong, steady hands had helped her build a new future from the dust of drought. The man she had come to love in the space of days, as naturally as breathing. Eleanor began to sing as she worked, her voice rising clear and hopeful in the morning air. The tune was an old folk song about a wanderer finding his way home, a song her mother had taught her long ago, that now held new meaning. And as she sang, she swore she could hear the echo of hoofbeats in the distance, carrying Ben back to her across the vast Montana landscape, not now, but soon. Soon enough. In the month that followed Ben's departure, Eleanor threw herself into the work of revitalizing her farm. With water from the new well, she was able to salvage some of her existing crops and plant new ones in sections where the old had withered beyond recovery. Each day, she extended the irrigation channels according to Ben's detailed notes, learning to read the land in ways she never had before. The ring on her finger caught the sunlight as she worked, a constant reminder of the promise that awaited her at the end of their separation. In the evenings, she would sit on her porch, watching the sunset and reading Ben's letters, which arrived with surprising regularity given the remoteness of the farms he was visiting. His words painted pictures of his work and his longing to return to her. He wrote of the Carson family's gratitude when water gushed from their new well, of difficult terrain at the Miller homestead that had nearly defeated his usual methods, of how he spoke of Eleanor to everyone he met, unable to keep her name from his conversations. Eleanor replied with equal candor, describing the progress on the farm, the first green shoots appearing in fields that had been dust just weeks before, and the plans she was making for their future together. She wrote of how she had begun to see their land through his eyes not just as acres to be farmed, but as a living system of earth and water, connected to everything around it. As the promised month drew to a close, Eleanor found herself watching the road with increasing frequency, her heart leaping at the sight of any distant rider. The farm had been transformed in Ben's absence not just by the water from the new well, but by the hope that now flowed through every aspect of her life. On the morning of the day Ben had promised to return, Eleanor woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. She dressed with particular care in a blue dress she had made years ago but rarely worn, recognizing with a smile that she wanted to look her best for the man who had seen her at her worst, exhausted, disheveled, covered in the dust of a failing farm. As the sun rose higher with no sign of Ben, Eleanor forced herself to focus on her daily tasks. She had just finished feeding the chickens when the sound she had been waiting for, hoofbeats on the hard, packed earth of the road, reached her ears. She turned, shading her eyes against the midday sun, and saw a familiar silhouette approaching. Ben sat tall in the saddle, guiding Scout at an easy trot toward the farm, toward home. Eleanor's heart seemed to expand in her chest, too full of joy to be contained. She walked to meet him, her steps quickening until she was running, heedless of dignity or restraint. Ben dismounted in one fluid motion and opened his arms just as Eleanor reached him, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of all the longing of their month apart. "You're here," she breathed against his neck. "You came back." "I promised I would," Ben replied, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her, "and I always keep my promises." Eleanor stepped back slightly to look at him, drinking in the sight of his face after so many days of absence. He looked tired but happy, his eyes alight with the same joy she felt coursing through her. "The farm," he said, glancing past her toward the fields. "Eleanor, it's transformed." "You've worked miracles." Eleanor shook her head, smiling. "Not miracles, just water and hard work and your excellent instructions." She took his hand, the one that had taught her so much about the land beneath her feet. "Come, I want to show you everything." Hand in hand, they walked the perimeter of the farm, Eleanor pointing out the progress she had made with the irrigation channels, the new plantings, and the areas she had designated for future expansion. Ben listened with evident pride, offering suggestions and praise in equal measure. When they reached the well, the source of all this new growth, Ben stopped, his expression thoughtful as he surveyed what they had created together. "Do you know," he said, "in all my years of finding water for others, I've never felt as satisfied as I do right now seeing what you've accomplished with this well." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "What we accomplished? I couldn't have done any of this without you, Ben." He turned to her, his expression suddenly serious. "There's something I need to tell you, Eleanor, something I've been considering during our time apart." Eleanor felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "I've been offered a permanent position with the territorial government, a desk job in Helena, overseeing water management for the entire region." He paused, watching her reaction. "It would mean no more traveling from farm to farm, no more weeks away from home." "Ben, that's wonderful," Eleanor said sincerely. "Your expertise would benefit so many people in that position." "I haven't accepted yet," Ben continued. "I wanted to discuss it with you first, because it would mean changes for both of us." Eleanor's heart raced. "Both of us." Ben reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band that gleamed in the sunlight. "Eleanor Foster," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I rode onto your farm a month ago looking for water and found instead the home I've been searching for all my life. If you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days helping this land and you flourish." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she understood what he was asking. "Are you proposing, Benjamin Newcomb?" "I am," he confirmed, a smile breaking across his face. "Properly this time, not just a promise." He took her hand, the one that wore his mother's ring. "Eleanor, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in all things, as we've been partners in bringing water to this land?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Ben, nothing would make me happier." Ben slipped the gold band onto her finger alongside his mother's silver ring, then pulled her into an embrace that sealed their promise. His kiss held all the passion of their parting and all the hope of their reunion, a beginning rather than an ending. That evening, as they sat on Eleanor's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, they talked of the future they would build together. Ben would accept the position in Helena, but they would maintain the farm as their true home, traveling between the two as the seasons and his work required. "We could build a bigger house," Ben suggested, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Something with room for a family eventually." Eleanor leaned into his embrace, her heart full at the thought of children running through fields made green by the water Ben had found. "I'd like that," she said softly. "This land deserves a family to love it, and you deserve someone to share the burden and the joy of this place," Ben replied. "No more facing drought or hardship alone. Whatever comes, we'll weather it together." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Eleanor and Ben remained on the porch, reluctant to end this first day of their life together. The ring on Eleanor's finger caught the last light of day, a circle without end, like the cycle of water that Ben had taught her to understand. From sky to earth, from earth to well, from well to field and back to sky again. "I never expected this," Eleanor mused, her head on Ben's shoulder. "When my crops were failing and the land was turning to dust, I thought the dream was over. I never imagined that the man who brought water would also bring love. And I never imagined that in helping your land find its heart, I would find mine," Ben replied, his voice low in the gathering darkness. "We saved each other, Eleanor, and we'll keep doing so every day from now on." As they finally rose to enter the house, their house now, the beginning of their shared home, Eleanor paused for one last look at the farm that had nearly failed, but now promised abundance. In the silver light of the rising moon, she could make out the silhouette of the well, standing as a testament to what determination, knowledge, and partnership could accomplish. "Thank you," she whispered, not just to Ben but to the land itself, the stubborn, beautiful, challenging land that had brought them together. Ben's hand found hers in the darkness, his strong, steady fingers intertwining with her own work-roughened ones. Together they stepped across the threshold, leaving the door open to the sweet night air and the promise of tomorrow. 1 year later, Eleanor stood on the porch of a new, larger farmhouse, cradling her infant daughter in her arms as she watched Ben directing workers in the installation of a windmill-powered pump system that would extend their irrigation capabilities even further. The farm had flourished beyond her wildest expectations, producing crops that had not only ensured their livelihood, but had positioned them as one of the most successful operations in the county. Ben's position with the territorial government had provided them with resources and knowledge that benefited not just their own land but neighboring farms as well. He had become known throughout the region as an expert in water management, his methods studied and replicated by others facing the harsh realities of frontier farming. As Eleanor watched her husband, for they had married in a simple ceremony, the autumn after his proposal, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a single year. From the edge of failure to abundant success, from solitary struggle to loving partnership, from drought to flowing water, Ben looked up from his work, catching sight of Eleanor and their daughter on the porch. His face broke into a smile of such pure happiness that Eleanor felt her heart swell with answering joy. He said something to the workers, then made his way toward the house, removing his hat as he approached. "My two favorite ladies," he said, climbing the porch steps to join them. He placed a gentle kiss on Eleanor's lips, then bent to touch their daughter's downy head. "How's little Rose today?" "Curious about everything, just like her father," Eleanor replied with a smile. "She's been watching the windmill construction with great interest," Ben chuckled. "A water finder in the making, perhaps." He put his arm around Eleanor, and together they looked out over their thriving farm. Fields of corn and wheat stretched toward the horizon, interspersed with vegetable gardens and the fruit tree saplings they had planted that spring. The irrigation channels Ben had designed formed a network across the land, distributing water precisely where it was needed. "I've been thinking," Ben said after a moment of companionable silence, "about expanding the orchard next year, and possibly adding some grazing land for cattle to the north section." Eleanor nodded. "I was thinking the same, and perhaps we could experiment with some of those drought-resistant wheat varieties you've been reading about." Ben squeezed her shoulders affectionately. "Always one step ahead of me." "Not ahead," Eleanor corrected. "Beside you, partners, remember," Ben's expression softened as he looked at his wife and daughter. "The best decision I ever made was riding onto your failing farm that day. And the best decision I ever made was letting you stay," Eleanor replied, leaning into his embrace. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the fertile fields in golden light, Eleanor thought about how close she had come to losing this land, and how, instead, she had gained not just water but a family, a future, and a love as deep and sustaining as the underground stream that flowed beneath their feet. Ben's strong, steady hands had indeed brought water to her failing farm, but they had brought so much more. They had brought hope, partnership, and a life richer than she had ever dared to imagine when she first came west, seeking independence and possibility. Together, Eleanor and Ben had transformed dust into abundance, solitude into companionship, and two separate journeys into one shared path. And as they stood on the porch of the home they had built together, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, they knew that whatever challenges the frontier might still bring, they would face them as they had faced the drought together, drawing strength from the well of love they had discovered in the most unexpected of places. A failing farm that had become the foundation of their shared future.